thinking about some of this is really comes from a place of an awareness that we have a tendency to take in a lot of good information. Like, we all have been inundated with countless amounts of information about how to be a good parent right now, and all of the things that we should be doing for our kids, and the best homeschooling resources, and all of the educational possibilities and opportunities that are available to our to us and to our kids, and everyone's got an idea about what we need, right? So in preparation for this talk, I just did a quick Google search just to see like what came up if you Googled coronavirus homeschooling, and it returned 65 million responses, which tells me two things. The first thing it tells me is that everybody feels like they know exactly what you need to parent your kids in the ways that they need to be parented. And it also tells me that maybe more optimistically, it's possible that we actually might, somebody might be acknowledging that there are that many different ways to do the right thing, right? So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I have 3 young kids, and like many of you, I'm also probably, like if you could see me right now, I'm like sitting in, we have multiple people in our house who are on Zoom calls, and we're trying to kind of manage what needs to be happening as a family, right? Just as many of you are as well. And so my concern here and the way that I'm thinking about what I want to share with you today really comes from a place of wanting us to all step back and realize this is a really unique time. Nobody's ever done this before, and we have to set realistic expectations for ourselves so we can be successful. The bottom line is that everybody's going to do this differently, and that's actually a good thing. So as much as we possibly can, sort of like limit or filter the information that's coming in about all these different options for you and your child, and I'm going to try to give you some things to think about. So I started to pull a couple of the memes and little quotes that I thought were kind of amusing, but here's one example where a parent is saying, I'm homeschooling like that substitute teacher who rolls in the TV for a movie and just eats snacks in the back of the class. And I think some days we all are going to have those days, and other days we may feel a little more on top of our game, both in parenting and also in being sort of educators for our kids. So I want us to, we'll talk a little bit about setting realistic expectations. I feel like, in light of us all being related to the college, affiliated with the college, I want to kind of share a little bit of sort of the research background for why I'm essentially going to ask us all to take a big deep breath and trust that what we're doing is going to be just fine and our kids are going to be okay. And I say all of that with full acknowledgement that this is an incredibly scary time for a lot of people. And so any levity throughout this presentation is not in any way intended to make light of the significance of the situation. I think we're all just juggling a lot. So we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be ready to learn, and how what we know about neuroscience influences what we should be doing with our kids right now. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the things that I think are the most important for us to be teaching right now. And I'm trying to leave you with some guiding principles. Now, I'm also more than happy to talk with each of you or any of you who have additional questions about your specific situation or your children, but it feels, without knowing the range of ages or needs that your children have, it would be inappropriate for me to give really specific suggestions, but I'm happy to do that in the Q&A. Okay, so to start, I want you to ask yourself a question, and I'm going to give us about a minute and a half to do this. I want you to ask yourself, what is your biggest fear for your child right now? So take a minute and write that down. I'll keep time, and I'll interrupt us in about a minute. If you're comfortable or want to, feel free to pop your response in the chat box, but no pressure. Okay. Now, obviously, I'm not expecting you to share right now, but I do want you to ask yourself the question, is that fear related to my child's academic success? So are the biggest things that you're concerned about right now related to their academic success? In some ways, I primed you to answer something that relates to their education just because you're in this webinar. But think about that in a bigger picture way, right? Like when you think about the biggest concerns you have for your child right now, are those fears related to their academic success? So the first thing we're going to talk a little bit about is setting realistic expectations. And this is, again, both for ourselves and for our children. I think many of us who are in the position of trying to kind of like provide an optimal learning experience for our children at home have days like this where you feel like you hustled. Like I had a day the other day where I was, we were outside, we biked, we'd done what I felt like were a day's worth of activities. And I looked up at the clock and it was 11 o'clock. And I thought, oh man, we've got a long way to go. Okay, so the only things I feel like we can really count on right now as we're making our plans for what we want to accomplish with our kids, we can count on the fact that they're going to regress and we're going to regress. When we talk about regression, we're talking about sort of backslides in behavior. Maybe we see our kids engaging in behaviors that they did like when they were younger. Maybe we see them being a little bit less focused, slightly less capable of kind of achieving to their academic potential in the ways that we're used to seeing. Sorry, the same is true for us, right? Like, I feel like most people who are in the position of having to work from home right now would also not identify that this is like the most productive they've ever been in their lives, right? We're all adjusting. We're maybe a little bit less patient with our kids. We're also just acclimating to a lot of new situations, right? And there's an inherent level of inconsistency and unpredictability that we're living with right now. So not only is sort of our external world unpredictable because of all of the things that are going on with the coronavirus and our work lives and communities being disrupted, but we also can't really expect that things are going to be the same day to day and that things are going to affect us in the same way day to day, that our children, like what worked today to manage whatever we needed to in terms of our work responsibilities and our responsibilities with our children was effective today, maybe not, maybe that won't work tomorrow. Maybe the behavior, I mean, the benefit is that the behaviors that we're seeing today that might be challenging may not be there tomorrow. We can just expect that things are not going to be consistent. And so we can kind of expect to fail. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's a really important and good thing for us to demonstrate for our kids and be as transparent as possible, saying, here are the things I'm trying to set up. We're trying to figure out a new family structure. We're trying to figure out how everybody can get their needs met. And we might try things that don't work. And then we'll reevaluate and come back together. The other thing I want to just encourage us all to do is to rely on our own instincts, right? So for as many activities as our kids' schools are creating for our children, as many pieces of advice as everyone has for us about how to talk to our kids about what's going on and what they should be learning and doing and how to set our schedules, we actually know our children best. We know ourselves best. And so I want everyone to feel sort of empowered to really rely on your own instincts and to trust your gut around what you and your kid need. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is readiness for learning. And if we know anything about neuroscience and trauma and disruptions in routine, we know that in this particular moment, you are least capable as a parent of trying to learn how to become a teacher. And your child is like the least capable that they will probably be to learn how to not only continue their academic program, but also to adjust to a new schedule and acclimate to new routines around learning, right? So this is not a prime moment to think like, oh, I'm gonna help my child get ahead. We're gonna do like this, like, let's just slow down and acknowledge that like, we're not ready. We have a lot of, I mean, people are like kind of struggling with significant anxiety. There's a lot of concerns about job stability. There's a lot of concerns about access to resources, right? Like those are the big things that we're dealing with. And that underlying level of uncertainty really doesn't set the stage for learning. So whatever we accomplish with our children around sort of formal academics and achievement, like that's a win. Like you're doing great if you feel like you've gotten some things accomplished. And I want to just, again, you can do anything, but not everything. So what are reasonable expectations? Think about where you are right now. Like, to what extent have you previously worked with your child before around academics? What are your current routines? Are you in a situation where you normally spend a whole day with your kid? Is that something you're used to doing? Think a little bit about those things. Also think about, like, a lot, I mean, people have children of different ages, right? So what would be reasonable for a toddler is very different from what's reasonable for a middle or high school student. So I encourage you to be really flexible. And to emphasize and to really prioritize taking care of yourself, and to build your schedule around things that are non-negotiables. So if you have like meetings and responsibilities, like prioritize those particular things. Maybe it's like a nap time, or maybe it's a work call, or maybe it's some sort of household chore that needs to be done, or some sort of religious practice, right? Like, focus around what are your major rocks in your day, and then think about how to establish routines around those particular activities that are non-negotiable for you, so that you can ensure that you get done what you need to get done, which is definitely going to support you in feeling like you're capable for showing up for your kid. What's going to work for you is going to be different from what works for everybody else. I've already, with my own kids, tried 2 different approaches. One is to have a scripted schedule where, like, hey, this is what we're doing all day, every day. And then I found that didn't really work, because sometimes they would get nothing done during the period that I had decided was like academics. And so we ended up moving to like a checklist system. So they have certain things on their checklist. And for me to get them acclimated to the checklist, I put stuff that they like to do. So I include, in addition to like, hey, do a page of your math homework, it was also like, go for a bike ride. Okay, I'm getting used to checking off those kinds of things. So there's definitely like some, you know, I philosophically, I won't go down a huge rabbit hole, but I feel like there's some real opportunities in this moment for us to think about like what's important and to reconnect with our values of what we want for our kids. So in this Instagram post, this person says, all it took was an apocalyptic virus to get us back to the simpler times we longed for, when parents didn't have to cart their kids to 100 activities a week and we could just send them outside to play. And I'll talk a little bit about the value of play in a minute, but I also really want to talk about what to teach and how to teach them. Okay, so recently in education, there have been these, well, talk about 2 things. One of the things is that the language that we are using right now, when we are educating our kids at home, is this language of homeschooling. So I want to talk a little bit about homeschooling, which was founded out of the idea that kids are inherently curious, that learning should be child-centered and self-directed, and best practices in homeschooling talk about kids from in early childhood having as much as maybe like a half an hour to an hour of structured academic time, and the rest is exploratory play. And then for kids as they get older, early and middle elementary school, you're talking about maybe 2 hours a day tops of focused, sort of directed learning activities. And for kids in middle and high school, you can be talking about more like 4 to 6 hours a day, but that's because they can get involved in longer projects. So thinking about like your time in your day, knowing that like the foundation of homeschooling or being is different from what we typically see in our public or private school systems, where kids have a very structured 8-hour day. That's not necessarily how people have been homeschooling effectively for a long time. And the other thing that has been an innovative practice lately in public school education and in higher ed too, is this focus on what they call a flipped classroom. And in a flipped classroom, the teacher comes up with very structured activities. They give them to the children. The children do the activities sort of independently, and then they come back to the educator and they talk about how it went and both the process and the product, right? That's considered a self-directed or child-centered approach to education. So I mention that because in this process of moving towards schooling our children at home or providing for their education at home, I feel like it's really helpful to have some background and understand what we're, we may actually be offering them an incredibly innovative opportunity by just even giving them a couple of hours of self-directed learning opportunities and trusting that they are naturally going to be curious and they are going to be successful in learning, and that by giving them that freedom and that flexibility and those few structured activities, we're actually going to nurture them and give them the skills that they need to be academically successful when things sort of return to normal in a different way. Okay, the other thing that's been a major emphasis in schooling is this focus on 21st century skills. And what I will say, as somebody who's spent a lot of time focused on social emotional learning, I want to talk about a couple things. One is the difference between education attainment and academic achievement. So I think a lot of us are really concerned right now, like, oh my gosh, my child isn't going to make good academic progress. I'm concerned about what's going to happen to their test scores, or what's going to happen to their grade in this class, or how are we going to make sure that they're making steady grade level progress. That's important. But what we know is a better predictor of long-term success is educational attainment. And educational attainment is what we talk about when we talk about finishing high school. And so the skills that the reason why educational attainment is a better predictor of lifelong success is because educational attainment requires us to have good skills of collaboration, requires us to be flexible. It requires that we have good social skills and can problem solve, that we're motivated and can work through challenges, that we're self-determined, that we know ourselves well enough to know how to get ourselves from one point to the next, and that we have good communication skills. It's really important for us to remember this right now, because things like self-regulation are often hard in family dynamics, and to whatever extent we can support our children in seeing themselves as whole people and engaging really collaboratively in our families and being self-motivated around their learning and all of those things, they are going to serve them academically. Academic achievement will catch up if we can continue to foster curiosity and some of these social emotional skills in our kids. I'm happy to share this after the fact if this is helpful, but it's called CASEL or CASEL. It's a Center for Social Emotional Learning. They came up with these guidelines for parents. So pay attention to your own feelings of stress or anxiety and think about how those might influence your kids, acknowledging and supporting children in processing their range of emotions, provide age-appropriate information, accurate answers about the news, and I think we can talk about that more if people have specific questions about that piece. And I think a lot of these points really talk about being very explicit with your children about their needs, about what you're trying to offer, and about what's going on. And that can all be done in a really developmentally appropriate way. Okay, so I want to offer a couple of guiding principles. One is prioritizing what is important to you. Thinking about your values, what you care about, making sure that your kid knows or understands or can do every day, and making time for that. Identifying what your opportunities and constraints are. Maybe you've always wanted your child to be more involved in household chores. What better opportunity to engage them than right now, when you're all home and you're in kind of teamwork mode trying to get everything done that you need to. And also think about some of the constraints that you're dealing with. They may not have access to their friends in the same way, or you may have time constraints in terms of your availability to support them with their academics, things like that. I also encourage you to set goals, and we'll do a little bit in a second, but setting goals and just being clear, short-term goals. Like, what do I want to get done this week? Tell your child what your goals are, ask them what their goals are. You can set some for yourself to model that, and take time to connect. Like, this is a pretty unique opportunity to be with your children, for better or for worse. But make sure that you find ways to take advantage of that opportunity and do what works. Sometimes what works is like, we're having a really nice time, me and my kid, and instead of doing the academic task that I thought we were going to get to, we're going to like do a cooking project, or we're going to finish watching a show that we were really involved in, and then we're going to get to the academics after that. And part of that is important because it fosters safety for your kids and security and connection. And like we said, those things are equally important as academic outcomes. And then just continue to revise as needed. And I think the more we can be transparent about our own process in doing this, the better we're modeling for our kids how they can do that in their own learning and in their own lives. Okay, so I realize we're kind of tight on time, but think about something that you want your child or children to learn this week. Again, feel free to share in the chat box if you want to, but you don't need to. And once you've done that, think a little bit about how you might teach that, or offer the opportunity for them to do that kind of learning. Okay. So I'm happy to answer questions, but a couple of follow-up things. One is if there are any specific questions that are not answered today that you want additional answers on, or you want to check in about, I'm available to do that. And the best way to contact me for that kind of thing is this website. And that Mount Holyoke is also, we are going to put out weekly videos with like little ideas for you as you think about your week. So those will come out on Sundays, and I'll make sure that Danielle has the link to those so she can share them with you. But that's kind of what I have for now. And I'm, again, happy to take any questions that people have.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bass. If folks have questions and just want to note in the chat feature, we definitely have time for a few questions. And while you're thinking about them, I'm also going to share a link to our Powered By page where you can check in for more opportunities like this one over the next few weeks. So any ideas for helping overachieving students during this time?
That's a tough question. And so I guess one of my thoughts is, how can I help that particular student? I have two thoughts. One is, when we say overachieving, it's kind of difficult to like completely know what you mean by overachieving. But I think if you're talking about a student who is super invested in ensuring that they get the best grade and do the best work, so I have two thoughts. One is encouraging them to take on independent projects and independent tasks and new responsibilities. So beginning to sort of expand their notions around independence in learning. So whether that's with the academic tasks that they're given from school, or maybe they want to take a new online class, or kind of encouraging them to do that of their own volition and seeing that as their own initiative, but not like, but also trying to remind them that there are other ways to be successful, and again, sort of expanding their view of what is education, right? So like when I think about what's really relevant for people to know right now, it's not necessarily like their multiplication tables or creating the best 5-paragraph essay, right? Like there are other really important skills that our kids need. Like they need to understand a little bit about epidemiology, and maybe and they need to maintain some level of social responsibility around ensuring other folks' safety, right? So maybe what we do with a child like that is we would say, okay, so like given what we're dealing with and some of these other skills academically or otherwise that you're interested in sort of using in different ways, like why not create a project for your class or for the community where you do like a mini video and you're explaining to kids some of the challenges, or some epidemiological principle, right? But playing off of some of their interest in helping them think about how to use their knowledge in new and creative ways that sort of foster that intrinsic sort of creativity, as opposed to just like, what box can I check next? Because I think we all have, I mean, if that's the student you're talking about, like I kind of know what you mean. And if I miss the mark, I'm happy to like respond differently if you want to provide more information.
Thanks so much. Any additional questions?
Sorry, can I follow up again?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Time on the project.
Certainly.
Yeah, so I think the other thing that I would suggest with a kid like that is, because you have this like luxury in some ways of time, help them think about, what do I think would make this project really great? And have them make a list and like even like make their own rating scale for what would make this project awesome, and then have them rate themselves, so that even though they're focused on creating an ideal final product, maybe you're pushing them to think a little more broadly about what an ideal project might look like, if that makes sense, as opposed to checking someone else's box so they get that extrinsic feedback.
Thanks so much. What about the student who hates school?
I have one of those in my house. It's been really interesting. And he is like the happiest he's ever been. And as his parent, I have like a new insight. I mean, as his parent and educator now, I have a new insight into what his teachers deal with on a daily basis, because he is so now ready to reject anything that looks or feels like school. And so for me, again, it's like this idea of like, okay, I need to back up. I need to remind myself to back up and think about what skills would he need to, and my kid has a learning disability too. What skills would he need to be successful and to want to engage, right? Like, how can he see academics as something that's like for him, right? As opposed to something other people do to him. So when I think about how to do that, for me, it's about like coming up with like really engaging activities. What does he like to do? Like, I'm not like, and he's one for whom I think I was saying earlier, right? Like I came up with like a checklist for him. And on his checklist includes things like go for a bike ride, eat a snack, like things he needs to do anyway that he can get quick wins on. And then filtering in a couple of like, okay, write about your day. And then maybe like I write one sentence, he writes one sentence, but the academic sort of like formal academic output is different for him. And I already like in a week can see how he is slowly like, oh, that's actually not so terrible and overwhelming. And like, I can do my checklist, and like, you know, seeing that as a little bit more beneficial for him. The other thing that with some students can help is sort of letting them know like, hey, here's what the expectations are. At some point later today, we're going to need to do this non-preferred task. What do you need to do first to get ready? And so for some kids, it's like, I need to go for a bike ride. I need to go outside. I need to, you know, check out and listen to music, whatever it is that they need to do to get ready to be available.
Thank you. I'm seeing a couple more here. My 4-year-old is in a Montessori program where her teachers say she works, learns independently all morning. I can't replicate this at home and get frustrated because she interrupts me every 2 minutes. Any pointers for helping her focus in a different environment, or is that just not realistic?
Yes and no, right? So I don't know. I mean, I think again, it's like comes back to what I was saying earlier about thinking about where you're starting from. So two things that I might do. One, I might engage her and say, listen, I've got to go do this thing. And in Montessori, they use the language of work, right? So what's your work for right now that you're going to do while I'm doing my work? And you can use timers, or you could say, how long do you think you could occupy yourself with that? And set goals around that. And then that can, I mean, there's this other whole piece that I didn't totally get into, but is real around embedding some of those academic concepts into what you're doing every day. So let's say you decide that the two of you are going to set a goal where she can be independent for 15 minutes 3 times a day, which it sounds like, I mean, I don't know the details, but let's just say that that's the goal you set. Maybe you come up with some way to chart that or graph that. So she's also learning some level of like math skill, and she's thinking in the same way that you are. And then she can see her progress. Like, oh, today I was able to do 3 20-minute sessions in the morning. And then, you know, and then you can always talk about like maybe having some sort of incentive around her getting special time with you. But if you both can work towards sort of a common goal, and you can say, hey, listen, eventually I'd like us to get to a place where I get a whole hour to do what I need to do. And then I can play with you for a little longer because I will have gotten more work done. But I think if you can balance some of that and engage the child in sort of pushing their themselves, sometimes that can be really helpful.
Thanks, Gwen. Do you think that this will change the face of education, thinking about your son and how happy he is now?
It's a really good question. I mean, in many ways, I hope so. And I have been so like, you know, I did sort of make, poke fun at like the number of academic resources that are out there right now. But I personally have been like pretty overwhelmed by the quality and dedication that of the materials and the dedication of teachers in schools trying to stay connected to their classes, which has been like a really interesting thing to watch. So yes, I do. So that's like a great thing to know exists within our education system. I do think that we are all going to learn the lessons that people who've homeschooled for a long time have known, which are like, kids are inherently curious. You don't have to do focused academics all day, and your kid can still achieve all of the milestones that we think of as like paramount in education. Like you could be a lawyer and doctor and have been homeschooled, and that's going to be okay. And I think we're all going to figure out different ways to balance homeschooling and parenting and working. So in an ideal world, yeah, I do hope on some level that we can kind of shift what the education system looks like. I also think, like I said before, that what it really emphasizes like what we actually need to know right now. Like I said, like some of the things that we focus on in terms of academic achievement have zero relevance in this current moment in time. Like they are not relevant for your survival. They're not relevant for your community engagement. That doesn't mean they never will be or they're not important, but like there really is hopefully going to be a shift back to what is relevant and valuable education, I think.
I'll ask a question. I'm curious if you've witnessed or been involved with any sort of like collective learning models at this time where sort of parents or guardians are sharing responsibilities for educating or not.
I haven't seen a ton. I've been involved in like some Zoom groups and some like communal read alouds and some sort of activity stuff. It depends a little bit on, I mean, I think we're all dealing with the same constraints, which are like technical bandwidth issues, timing. So like my daughter does some collaborative learning stuff right now online, and it's like, oh wait, we're out doing this other thing, we got to get home to, so like it's like this new kind of juggling, and by out doing this other thing I mean like we're in the backyard doing a project or something because nobody can really go anywhere. But I do think there'll be more of that as people figure out how to like make community in that way. But I also think we're all negotiating variables that we don't normally negotiate to have to schedule around. Thank you.
Thanks so much. This has been great. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Bass. To those who are present, we so appreciate your questions and your time. If you're interested, we're holding another webinar this Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern time that focuses on managing stress around COVID with Dr. Gretchen Smelter, who's an alum of the class of 1987. So we certainly encourage you to join us for that moment as well. So again, Gwen, thank you so much for being with us.
An article in the chat box too that may be helpful to folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So this closes our webinar for today, and we look forward to being in touch with you all soon again. Have a good one, everyone.